it's a question.
Yeah.
Is it? No. No.
Yeah.
No.
Sorry, I'm just deaf.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah.
I think I'm so thoughtful that my brain's not working.
No.
You're going to be at a slight disadvantage.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
All right, how's that sounding? Am I too loud? That's probably all right there. Yep, perfect. All right, thank you so much for having me come back, allowing me to come back to you after the special council meeting. We have 30 minutes allocated, but we do have extra time now, so I'm really happy to be directed by everyone here and the questions and further feedback you might have. The slides have already been updated to the hub, and thank you for allowing us some additional time just to finalise these slides for this evening. The extra time certainly helped. Tonight we're going to be kind of reviewing what we've previously heard and any further discussion points you would like to make, any new feedback that you've kind of gone away, reflected on, and have new thoughts that you'd like to share. We're going to do a bit of a sense check, and I've got some questions throughout the presentation on the general direction emerging from the draft structure plan, and then we'll discuss the early thoughts around the consultation planning and then next steps. And I realise I've got my notes on my personal laptop here, so I'll try and keep that along at the same time. So what I wanted to touch on first, and now that I've created this slide, I probably should have included it in the previous pack of information. So it's nice to kind of reflect on that and have the opportunity to look at it again. What we wanted to confirm today is the structure plan is not setting 100% locked in future for all of these options that we're talking about. But it's providing the options, not the fixed outcomes. So what it will allow us to do is consider these streetscape and public realm improvement options. It's an early level concept. If it does get support from the community, from the elected members, and it is endorsed as part of the structure plan, that will set the tone for further concept development. And there's always opportunities to make further refinements, further design changes through and further consultation. And obviously, we're doing some high-level costing as part of these streetscape and public realm improvements, but any forward planning would be subject to the standard budget bid process and may require, value management and things like that. So, but what it does is it allows us to create the framework to test these priorities and timing. So, we're preparing the guidance documents for around design and through other information included within the structure plan itself, and that will form the basis for our direction of a potential future code amendment should we go down that path. What this structure plan doesn't do is it doesn't approve those changes straight away. It does set the strategic direction for a future code amendment, which is still another separate process with its own background investigations, separate community consultation requirements, and further reports to council and the minister prior to any changes occurring. So I just wanted to make that super clear for anyone that may not be aware here or at home.
Just got a question from Councillor.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that, thank you for that dot point, that makes it super crystal clear, because it did start, there was no delineation
Yes.
before.
Yeah.
But perhaps you could go through with a bit more detail about what a future code amendment would look like. Why would we need a future code amendment, please?
Yeah, sure. And stretching our mind back to the previous presentation, and apologies I don't have the slide up, but I can bring it up should we need. But currently we have Township Main Street Zone, which allows for particular land use activities that was provided to us through the creation of the Planning and Design Code by the state government. That sets the current planning system for how all of the development is assessed within the town of Gawler, for anything new that is proposed, and includes things around building height, design requirements, the car parking requirements, and the like. And what it probably has resulted in some potential limited opportunity for exploring new types of development within the town centre, and has potentially allowed the creep of potentially some incompatible land uses that may be better suited to elsewhere. Hindsight's a beautiful thing, and we're hoping that through a potential code amendment, we can structure through a proposed new zone, and then the sub-zone that we talked about last time. The sub-zone in particular will allow us to really tailor those land use activities and the built form parameters to create the outcome that we want. That's probably the piece missing from the puzzle currently. We used to have the development control plan that was really like packed full of information. That all got stripped out when it got transferred over to the planning design code. What we're trying to do is bring back some of that control to council.
So would it be fair to say it would help strengthen our position? And maybe
Absolutely.
Maybe again, we need to stress that, because the feeling might be that we were protected, and as you've just summarised, we've lost that, and what we're trying to do is put ourselves back into a position of strength. I think that's an important point to discuss with our community, because that's the reassurance.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, sure.
In terms of how that works with the code amendment, is it sort of like it's a code amendment for the entire area, and then it's sort of grandfathered over the top of anything which is an incompatible use?
Yes, so existing land uses remain unchanged. Their existing use rights continue.
Okay, and then I imagine, does that potentially have some financial implications and other things which will need to get navigated through sites?
Potentially through things like maybe land value may change. Should there be further development opportunity, then through a proposed, upzoning, should an upzoning occur, and that may not necessarily be the case, but is that kind of the thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Upzoning a bit more if there's, I don't know if the opposite of upzoning is downzoning. That's just sorry, wasn't sure of the lingo, just taking a logical guess there. But yeah, if there's, I imagine there won't be too many examples of downzoning from changing the code.
And it'll be hard to determine. What I would like to do is go away and we'll do some more testing of that. Whilst we want to create opportunities for new types and complementary types of development to come in, we're also proposing through the subzone some restrictions around the built form parameters, which we'll discuss more around the footprint, building envelope and things like that. So we want to create the right types of opportunity, but we're not proposing to bring in huge incompatible higher building heights and things like that. So Andrew, do you want to? Thank you.
Thank you. Just going back to what Helen said, and I think, and probably also what the Deputy Mayor said, I think there are some gaps in the existing zone structure for the town. So there's no sub-zones. So one of the challenges you're all aware of, because you've seen it directly opposite the admin centre, and of itself it's a good quality example of what it is, but in terms of the use, I guess car garages and repair workshops and the like, they have a purpose and a place, but it probably isn't an ideal outcome. The lack of sub-zones means you really don't have much control under the current zoning. You can go to CAP like it did, and you can try and put awnings and other things on it, and you can try and make it as aesthetically acceptable as possible, but it still struggles. So I think that's one example where we're looking at zones and, I guess, controls. It's about getting the right package. Another example is the transition from the old Development Act to the PDI Act with High Street. So High Street, under the Development Act, we had design guidelines about, housing basically that was set into the hill and was cantilevered and responsive to site constraints, if you recall. And then you end up in the PDI Act where it's commercial zoning and people trying to work out how to, even with the best of intentions, put hairdressers or other commercial uses up there, which really struggled in terms of disabled access. So I think when we're looking at the zones, it's about putting the right uses in the right places. And I guess having on top of that the layer of design guidelines. So, thank you.
Obviously, obviously there's something to navigate there in terms of assisting in terms of economic development, but I guess we see the example with the DDA compliance where sort of you touch one thing and it triggers a bunch of other issues you have to address. I guess is that how do we be cognizant of that in this process? Say the car workshop, eventually they did move out of there, and then someone wants to knock something down, and then they have to refurbish the whole site, or to meet the code?
Using that example, if they were to do assuming that it's a non-heritage place, of course, if they were to do a knockdown rebuild, then they would be subject to the planning requirements of the day, and separate to that would be any of your building code requirements, which would be all your accessibility requirements, your toilets, your access, lifts, and those types of things all fall under. So you basically have to get both types of approvals. So
land use, a different land use could continue but within the same structure. A land use that meets the new code requirements could continue within the same structure. Okay, good. Because I think that would prevent us from having a situation where perhaps if that area was empty, I would be worried. But, so that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Councillor Sandler.
To do with the heading, town centre structure plan, are we talking the town centre structure plan for the Murray Street, or say from the river to the hills this side? Are we talking that, or are we talking further expanding out to, say, the Homemaker Centre or Gawler Green and so forth? I mean, to me, that's the only thing I can't get my head around.
So Councillor Hennessy's just showing you a quick...
Well, then I'll go on with the point of the main street. For many, many years, so many of the shops in the main street were bought by investors, farmers and that around the area, which they own a major area in the main street. And we're now seeing that what's happening in the main street, we've got op shops, we've got at the moment Ray White are moving into a big shop, being the Bunya Press and all this sort of stuff. To make people want to come to Murray Street as, say, the centre or whatever, how do we encourage that? Because we as a council, we have no authority about saying if somebody comes along to David and says, I'm going to put a op shop or a real estate thing in there, and David can't say, no, you can't. We don't have that ruling, do we? So, I mean, we've got to have a vibrant area that we're going to pinpoint, and that's why I'm saying about the town centre structure. Where exactly is it? But Helen pointed something out there.
That's the map that you can see is correct. So it's river to just to the other side of High Street, down to just past the Gawler Central train station, and then out to Adelaide Road to the triangle where Battery World is. So that's the extended portion of the town centre project, and then goes down just south of the mill site at Cup with Elders Insurance and things like that on both sides of the road.
Yeah, if I can say one thing, we've got a new business that's just moved into the community area up there where Cheapest Chips and all those are up the top. And if you haven't been to Silly Sollies, you should go, because you cannot believe, no matter what time of the day you go there, you can hardly get a car park. That wasn't the case before they came. And a friend of mine is the manager at a Super Chief, and he said to me when I was there the other day, I cannot understand why these vacant shops are here when the mobs of people that are coming to that area. So, A, it's a draw card because Silly Sollies has got the best specials and all this sort of stuff, and if you haven't been, go. But we need something to make whatever we're going to work on here a vibrant area where Mick will tell all his friends that, yes, we've got to go there, that's it. So is there any answers as to why so many vacant shops? We've got 3 vacant in the main street here, and that may well be that the people that own them just sit on what they want to get, and therefore it becomes too expensive for someone to go in and start up another business, because I do know that I've heard people say they'd love to come to Gawler, but it's too expensive to hire.
Yeah, and I think any type of land use activity with the that fits within the town centre and has the relevant approvals and the like, that encourages increased pedestrian community activity is always going to be supported, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this project. In regards to the vacancies, we have quite a low vacancy, but I do note that we do have a few buildings that are long-term vacant. So we will follow up with those landowners to understand their thoughts process and their barriers to why it's not currently being tenanted. And it may be that they're looking for a particular type of business that isn't currently coming to Gawler, and with our new Economic Development Officer, we will continue to work together and approach or try and connect business inquiries to relevant landowners as they do come to council, and we're already doing that. So, Andrew.
Just on that issue, I think it's a mistake to look at the structure plan as being the only lever that exists to deal with those issues. I mean, we had a meeting last night for a couple of hours when Helen was there, and we were talking about, I guess, the scope of the 41 committee, and they're as keen as can be to be on the ground delivering outcomes that are linked to the economic development framework and a number of other initiatives as well. So I think you need to look at what the structure plan really is, and the structure plan is about how we manage traffic and movement. It's about some of those questions of zones and subzones and design, because there are gaps, as we've talked about, in the town centre at the moment in terms of a lack of control on some of these things. And I guess there is that conversation about what does mixed use look like and what can we accept as reasonable. So it can't be everything to everyone. And, you know, Silly Solids is an interesting story in its own right, but that's for another day. But we're aware of that conversation, and we'll walk you through that as we go further.
Perfect. All right, well, we'll press on. The presentation is structured around providing some more context and information around the previous feedback that we received. Also happy to discuss any other feedback questions as we go through this. Quick summary of, on the left-hand side, of the previous issues raised, and I'm hoping that I have captured all of them, and if I haven't, please let me know as we continue through the presentation, noting that there were a number of different things raised, but also some, and then in the orange text, some comments where there were noted examples around the state of good outcomes that have seen these types of changes occur. So I won't dwell on this one for too long. So these are in absolutely no particular order. They're just how I wrote them down in my documentation, and so so this is how we'll progress them. So yeah, not weighted in any particular order. I've included some imagery in the top right-hand corner. This is not provided for you to be able to get your microscope out and be able to read in detail. It's just to demonstrate that this is an existing page within the full document of the structure plan, just to demonstrate that we are considering these issues, and it will be available once the draft has been further updated. So one of the discussion points that we talked about was how do we enhance the greener Gawler outcomes that were listed, that was the overarching theme of basically the G2046. We probably didn't touch on it quite enough in the last workshop, so I wanted to be really explicit here that it actually has been quite a strong consideration. Whilst it wasn't pulled out as a particular vision objective statement, it is an overarching theme across the entire document. So part of what our preliminary assessments did was have a look at what our existing green and canopy cover is across the town centre, and including the river corridor, it's not too bad for obvious reasons, but you take the river corridor out and our town centre is actually sitting around 12%, which is very low. Part of what this project, through those early investigations, was identifying was a need and the requirement essentially to embed some more green outcomes through these streetscape design concepts. And what the recommendation currently is to set, that we would like to, consult on through, the chamber and the community is, should we be considering setting a canopy target, and the recommendation is for a 30% overall canopy target, and that would include the river corridor. So it's an approximate increase of, I think, off the top of my head, about 8% additional across the town centre. Just to create more of those green outcomes. There's obviously, there's amenity benefits, there's also cooling benefits, and it's not just focused to Murray Street, it's also including our laneways, side streets and alternative more major roads around the town centre. So I guess if anyone wants to provide any comments or feedbacks around that question, each of the kind of discussion points that I've included this evening, I've included like what this workshop is testing, just as a bit of a discussion point that I would love to be able to get some feedback should you have any thoughts, feelings or otherwise. If not, then I consider it as read and we press forward.
Let's ask some questions. Helen.
Well, just to go back one, which was what you heard at the last meeting, the transport impacts. Thank you very much for supplying this. It's much easier to read.
Yeah.
My concern is that we, by closing or making Todd Street a one-way out and removing the Lindop Lane and the changes to Light Square, which I now fully understand, I had it ran the wrong way the other night, we're actually we've got two parallel roads. We've got Murray Street and we've got the Julian Terrace, Whitelaw Terrace and whatever. And you can't actually you can only get to them by going to one end of the street or the other. You're actually closing all of those side streets. I think we're going to get some immediate feedback on that. I'm guessing the reason is to try and keep the traffic flowing smoothly and calmly. But that's a major change in the street, is to say you've got two parallel runs and a high street, I suppose, is another one way. I think it's only when people read it in great detail that comes across. So I'm guessing I'm underlining the transport impacts are more than even that I realised until I went through this document. And that's probably it for the moment. Are we up?
Yeah, and then regarding the Todd Street example, it does recommend a one-way coming from the Audi side into Murray Street with a left turn only. What we are proposing, for the exact reason that you mentioned, to kind of keep that traffic moving, is removing the right-hand turns, particularly into Todd Street. I personally did the pedestrian counts on that intersection. So we went out 3 times a day for a period of 2 weeks and tracked the pedestrian movement across different intersections, some formalised, some not. I counted nearly 80 people crossing illegally at that exact intersection, and between the right turn movements, the bus pulling up on the left-hand lane, traffic driving around, people turning right, it is just an accident waiting to happen. And so we asked the consultant team to have a review of that, to not only provide options for improving traffic flow on Murray Street, but also for improving safety outcomes and greening outcomes. And that's how we've come to that. But I will say that Todd Street does have an alternative option, which I'm happy to share with elected members via the next, I'll put it up on the hub, and that does retain a 2-way option, I'm pretty sure. We've reduced
I have no problems with the right turns out or the right turns in, but the left turn, so going up north, going north up Murray Street, the left turn in, because you've got all those businesses in there now, the post office, the flower place, the Aldi, the Drakes. If we cut that, I just think we're providing barriers. I think that what will happen is that people will use the Jacob Street and whiz through the Woolies car park trying to get to the post office. Yeah. We're going to create, I hate this term, we're going to create rat runs where they're not rat runs, and because we're cutting things, we're separating the 2 streets too much. Yeah,
and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. So Andrew, do you just want to, burning feedback?
That's not me. Okay, good. I guess the comment I would make, and this is something we've toyed with, I think what Stacey said is right, which is we're not saying this is exactly how it has to be. We're giving a shopping list of choices. When we did the walk around, and most of us in this room probably walk around the town centre regularly. On the day we had the consultants, we were walking down and we got to the junction of Murray where it turns and it goes south, where you've got the service station and the pub on the other side, and you saw cars there getting almost T-boned by buses. It was the same day a week that a car decided to mount another car on Murray Street, and we've had that many accidents, I can count them on about 2 hands in the last 6 months. And most of those incidents occur for a combination of factors. One is just terrible driving, but the second one probably is just people trying to take their chances to get across against rows of traffic. There's deliberate theory or philosophy, and I guess maybe I'm partly to blame on this one, that we do need to reduce people's thoughts that Murray Street's everything to everyone. It is a street, not a road. And we are trying to encourage people to use Julian and other places to come through as much as we can. So if you're in southern Murray, if you like, if you want to go north, you're not going up the next 1.5 kilometres of Murray Street, you're going down Julian to go around, to go to Light Square. Because we don't want that turn against all those roads, those lines of traffic, because it's just too unsafe. I respect that there might be strong opinions other ways saying we've got it wrong, and if we've got aspects wrong, we'll change it. But we just wanted to show you that there was some thinking behind this, and we can walk it back and we can walk it further forward, but we're better to at least discuss it.
And it's probably just worth noting that we're not locked into a preferred outcome, and it's all subject to, further feedback. And I've lost my train of thought because it looks like Councillor Solomon had a question. Oh, no? Oh. I do. No, that's all right, because I've lost my train of thought now to loop back to me, so.
On the same topic, it was more it's a comment, but I thought that to give feedback. But so you'd say there'll be something after the session.
Yeah, I'll provide some. And how we've structured it is we're recommending and it'll come up in a later slide, but we're recommending that we go out to consultation, showing one preferred outcome in terms of for the purposes of consultation. But the idea is that we would bring all of the options to consultation sessions to be able to demonstrate that we have considered other options, but these are the reasons why we're preferring this particular one, at least for feedback. Todd Street is one where we do have a higher embellishment option and a lower embellishment option. The one with the concept with the one way is the higher change option. So we absolutely can take feedback on that for an alternative option. What I would say though is that it's really easy to go out to consultation on a low change option to get community support. What we would really like to test is a higher change option just to get the community to think about potential options and alternatives. If the feedback comes back that the one way, when we get 100% not support for the one way, absolutely we'll go and have a look at that and make those changes for a better outcome. But it's good to test some of these ideas, particularly if they're a little bit different.
Yeah.
So what will happen to the higher option? And if we've said there's 3, you want to go out in the middle?
Not all of them have 3. The example I've included in the slides is the one that has 3. The others have potentially, some have 2, some only have 1 because it didn't feel like it was necessary to have alternatives in that scenario.
I guess what I'm looking to understand, when we think about these things going out to consultation, obviously, got expertise here. I'm not a traffic engineer, but so the things I've read and what media I've consumed seems to suggest that people love to keep moving, and that some of that rat running is solved by, even if people are going a longer route, sometimes just psychologically having to stop and start is an impediment which sees people go, I'm going to turn down either street now, and that free-flowing traffic on Lindock Road, on Murray Street, Julian Terrace, might actually encourage people to, 1, do the speed limit, but 2, not rat run so much. I'd love to understand if there is behind that, which I've just said, that there is any validity to that, and what, from a traffic engineering perspective, is the best to stop rat running, because we know that rat runs are not necessarily the shortest route all the time. So I think that if that's reflected in the consultation document, both for us as a council, but also for the community to go, yeah, that's right, so that we at least know.
Yeah. And all of these designs have been developed in consultation with B Engineering, which is our traffic movement specialist, with Jensen Plus, like through an urban design and landscape lens as well. So they've worked very closely together for all of these.
Also quickly, in terms of canopy, anecdotal feedback, people hate it as a traffic calming measure, but, for lack of a better term, but the cooling effect is phenomenal for energy saving and other things, which I think is taken for granted.
The one thing I was also going to say, which I completely failed to mention because it just escaped me, it's not just about whether the turning movements and the movement of traffic, it's also, if you look at some of the drawings in here, some of those removal of turn movements allow you to put landscaping and trees, for example, in places where you otherwise couldn't. Yeah. So it's not just about the movement of vehicles, it's about how you get that canopy cover target. Again, these are just our ideas, but at least we're having that conversation. I think, even going back to what Isaac said, one of our reference group conversations, there was that feedback about people want to go through faster, but people prefer it to be a street rather than a road. So two diametrically opposite positions in the same statement. Yeah. And I guess there's that conflict you'll see in the community. That's why you do the engagement, test it out in terms of which mix of options work best, and at least we're informed to make that choice.
I think I've had more people say fantastic what council's done with the way that Audi has fitted in around here, because a lot of people were saying, you know, this is going to be a nightmare, and those that have got nothing else to do but to have a go at council that have actually said to me, I can't believe it, you've now done something right. So whoever designed that, and I hear what Helen says, the only thing that you haven't stopped is a right turn out of that street into Murray Street. It's got to stop. My son gets too many crashes and only left out of there, but I've got to say that has really worked, because the amount of vehicles that are parked in around behind the bank and the post office and all that sort of stuff, it is very successful.
Good. Yes.
What did I say that I was funny?
I said about banking up, sorry. Terrible joke, terrible joke.
Don't encourage it.
So just touching on the themes that you picked up from our information briefing, just there. I think, so caution around building heights, I think is correct.
Caution around building heights, you said?
Caution around building heights, I think is correct, but I think it also, some of it was more about appetite on sustainable building heights. So I think the caution was warranted, but it's not to be taken as a negative. It's more about, if we do it, it needs to be done right. And I think we are talking about protecting key vistas and streetscapes and whatever else that actually leads into that.
Yeah.
And then we do talk about basements and underground car parking usage, and again, all that links into it. I'm just really hypersensitive, I guess, on the caution about building heights coming across of that we don't want it, because if we do it right, I think we can agree it can be done right. And I think we did talk about some great examples, but we need to do it right. And I think some of your modelling does actually show some of those opportunities. But that said, even I think we teased it out in the information briefing that we need to be pretty careful on how we communicate it, because we can turn around and go, oh, these we could entertain 5-storey, but then that sounds to the average punter that we're going to have skyscrapers all around us, when we know it's not correct, but it can seem like it. So definitely cautious for a magnitude of reasons, but I think overall there is an acceptance that we do actually need to think about this appropriately, because alternatively we could end up with some of those bad developments that do take our vistas and do actually feed into it and don't appropriately use undercroft car parking and the like. So I guess I just wanted to touch on that one, because I think the way and the points that you made, I think were really good at the information briefing, but the points we also might have fed back were very also warranted and good, but it wasn't that we're against it.
Yes, of course, yeah. And I had noted that in my minutes, and it may not have come across appropriately in the slides, but yes, absolutely.
It did occur to me that if perhaps we were able to 3D model some of this, some of the diagrams are better than others, but in terms of the streetscape and the whatever, I mean, it might actually be easier to recognise if it was 3D rather than 2. Because I think then you'll get distance protected. So if for example, we took Walker Place and then built a situation around that, then you could see up Carlton Road and wherever. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, and we were limited, unfortunately, by scope and budget. So we do have a couple of sites that do have some concept designs, which I'll also include that into the hub just so you can see the alternative. I didn't want to overwhelm you with 20 different options and concepts and things for the purposes of tonight. But yeah, absolutely more than happy to share that. With further budget, concept development, once we get endorsed options, then absolutely that's something to consider. I'm also, having some early thoughts around, or not early thoughts because it'll come up very quickly, but how we might be able to represent that potential change how do we show that if you're standing out on the street, and can we have something in front of you that will show you what the impact might be, so you can actually see it. I've done it before just through printed materials, but we'll explore what those opportunities might be. So it's much easier when you're standing out there and you can feel it, see it contextually. Yeah. So yeah, leave that one with me. All right. Caution around building height. So support for change but concern about excessive or poorly located height. Strong desire to protect the heritage, character and street scale. How we've approached the draft structure plan is heights location specific, not uniform, so we're not applying blanket heights all across the city. It'll be very contextual based on the size, scale and dimensions of the lots included in any potential development. Taller buildings are obviously be focused on larger sites, which generally happen to be in our kind of transition areas, in the kind of outer areas of the town centre. Unless a shopping centre wants to do something different. Some of the early considerations that were included in our investigation works through our urban design and built form review includes some early thoughts that the consultants had around making sure that we reinforce the Murray street wall, managing height, transition areas, how we transition between historic and non-historic places, and how we protect the Gawler East escarpment as well, which is those vista lines, and we'll talk about that later. I don't want to dwell on that one too much because we do have some further detail in the following slides. I've gone through this in a lot more detail now, and I've read it a number of times, and the more I read it, the more I pick up. And I will be completely honest, when I first opened the document, and we've restructured it since then, but with all the different diagrams and information and different changes depending on where you were, it was quite overwhelming to begin with. I think through these fact sheets that we'll develop, it'll really help explain the concept and how council can bring back that strength to our assessments and advice to landowners and developers. So wanted to bring back the street wall concept just for more information. So street wall is what you see, basically your facade treatment at the street. Generally within the town centre, we have majority of places probably are 2-storey. We do have 1-storey places as well though. And the street wall is essentially what you feel when you walk down the street. You're noticing the street wall. You're not necessarily noticing the height at first because you're at the human scale. And that's where all your character, public realm kind of stuff will kind of sit, and that's what you immediately notice when you enter a space. What we're proposing to do through this process is protect that street wall height and not encroach in that where you're within Murray Street, so maintaining a maximum 2-storey at that street wall. And then should you have any further height proposed, it would be stepped back from Murray Street and then step back further, and I'll show you some additional slides about how that would work. What this is also proposing is potentially a 3-storey street wall on the Apex Park side. Given that it's quite a wide road corridor, it's opposite an established open space with large, significant vegetation, like formalised trees, and so a 3-storey street wall would still actually be lower, like less height than the established trees on the opposite side of the road. And with that, quite wide road reserve, it's considered to not have as much of a impact, and there's less heritage concerns on that side. But obviously that would also come into play should it become relevant. What we've flagged in this slide is that even though these parameters will be applied consistently throughout the town centre, that not all sites will be able to achieve a maximum building height of 4 or 5 stories, where proposed the lots that we're talking about would have to be of such a scale that it would be able to not only have the width but the depth in order to have 3rd-storey setbacks, side setbacks depending on what it's adjoining next to, and have the depth to be able to get anything of scale and size to actually make it a usable upper levels. So there are only some sites across the town centre that would be suitable for that. I'm going to go away and do a little bit more work on that, just to kind of calculate how many we actually think is reality. The alternative to that is opportunities for amalgamation of sites and things like that, but should they include any heritage character places, that also changes what they're able to do.
Yeah, the slide about three on has that whole, has exactly captured that idea that it needs to be wide enough to be able to allow the extra stories. So yeah, I think that would be a great idea, because at the moment, I suspect people think the whole of Murray Street is going to look like that.
Yeah.
It's going to frighten them.
Yeah.
On that issue, going back to probably what Councillor Sample said earlier, the street is tightly owned. So if you look at the example of, if you like, the Genos development, you're having to basically acquire 3, 4 or 5 properties to create a suitable site. It's incredibly difficult in the central heritage hub, I'd call it, to achieve anything of that scale. So it's probably more likely to be on the bigger individual parcels, which are basically north and south of the heritage precinct. I'd call it the core precinct in the middle, where you may, subject to design, have a chance to achieve anything like this. So it's how you message that, I guess. We have to work that through.
I think it's really important, because otherwise people assume the whole street is fair game for this, and that's.
But to give credit to Stacey as well, and I think you picked it up on slide 10, and from the slides in and around there, it's much easier to visualise that now than probably at our first presentation. So just hats off to Stacey for presenting that.
We'll loop back to this one in a second.
Yep.
So just in terms of, I think the visuals will help in a few ways, because I think one of them is stories. I see you've defined stories there by the meterage, because I guess this is 2 stories technically, but I don't know how many stories you would call this on an actual frontage, 5 or something like that. So I guess that's one comment. And then just, is the street wall going to also be something in consideration on the Julian Terrace side, or is that is that going to be how do you manage that in terms of a big building that goes across, if you're wanting to also integrate the Julian Terrace, Whitelaw Terrace side?
Yeah, so on that image on the screen, the 3-storey new street wall fronting Apex Park and Goose Island would stretch that Julian Terrace part. I am just currently awaiting the draft updated design guidelines to confirm the approach for the remaining town centre. I do not anticipate any deviation from the 2-storey street wall. It's a solid concept, it's tried and tested. I don't think we're looking to go out on a limb and propose something wildly different in that space. So yeah, I just want to confirm that though before I do 100% state that. So this image is kind of saying the same, similar thing, but I think it provides an important context of where we're talking about your street wall. You'll have a mandatory setback of 6 metres generally applied across the town centre. But what the images are trying to detail is that when you're a person standing on the opposite side of the street, depending on the location, and I'm using Murray Street as the example for this one, there is a percentage of building that it should not be visually prominent and it should not overtake the existing established street wall and buildings. So the dot point that I've been provided says that any additional height above 4 stories is proposed to not be visible from the opposite side of the road, meaning that it would have to be set back in such a way that you wouldn't actually be able to notice it from the ground. That's the type of setback that we're talking about. I will note that in the testing A example, it does show that you can actually see 26% of that upper 4th level as part of that. So I'm going away to confirm what that inconsistency is and get that amended, but I just wanted to show. Obviously the bottom 2, where we're talking about 5 stories in Murray Street, standing across the other side of Murray Street, you'd be able to see 42% of the testing B option and 33% absolutely doesn't meet the requirement, would not be supported. We'd be asking someone to go back and redesign that to have a much smaller upper level design outcome. So yeah, I hope that kind of demonstrates how that kind of works. I have been doing some research and trying to find some alternative ways to show that, because you're exactly right, a 2D is quite tricky. I've just as of this afternoon, whilst I was waiting to come back to council, I've found some examples interstate through alternative heritage design guidelines that shows it in a 3D format, which I think that might be a really great way to show that, because it shows the scale of the setback and the proportions of something that's a bit more realistic. So yeah, so we'll continue to explore those opportunities. And so the built form parameters and also includes the interface types, because not all situations are the same. Jensen's have recommended that different setbacks and considerations be applied to different types of adjoining uses. So they've said you wouldn't approach town centre side streets the same way that you would a development next to a park or next to a residential property or high street or the clock tower in particular. Super significant. We need to make sure that those visual lines are maintained from where you're standing within Murray Street, and these interface setbacks and examples will show the development industry what our expectations are of being able to preserve those view lines. Now this one makes a lot more sense now, so and it's so good to be able to provide like all the context to lead up to this, but if you see this for the first time, it's quite overwhelming. So yeah, this demonstrates maximum control envelopes, not architectural floor plates. So what this essentially does is creates a 3-dimensional boundary that defines the outer limits of where a building is allowed to go. It's not building design, it's not a floor plan. What it does is you basically get that's the maximum, and then you do your design. So you have to take out space for open space, space for car parking, space for additional setbacks, space for additional design considerations. And then the building will shape and form, but it would never extend beyond, well, ideally it should never extend beyond that maximum control envelope. That should set the tone, and then everything else be considered within that envelope. So it gives us a really good understanding of what's potentially possible, and it kind of makes the outcomes predictable. It helps us prevent overdevelopment up front by setting really clear expectations about what we're willing and not willing to consider. But it still provides the flexibility for people to be able to design within that envelope. And then also helps the development assessment team reduce their information requests and liaison with applicants and things like that. So any questions about that one? Yeah, Mayor.
Yeah, that's a good graphic. The only thing that I would just question, so, and I know this isn't been surveyed or anything like that, but the High Street and Murray Street relationship, there is that opportunity where High Street is actually higher than Murray Street. So if we did actually draw it closer to actual, you'd probably have high streetscape starting at the first story upper line, and then what does that actually do? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if we're doing a cross-section, that high street performs a lot differently than what Murray Street does, and then again, Whitelaw, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, we can have that tweaked up, absolutely, just to kind of see more realistically how that might look. Probably what's good to notice as well.
Yeah, that's it.
It does make sense.
Yeah, just around it, because right now we are talking about the curvature, but realistically there's a lot of opportunities I think High Street presents as it gets higher to Murray Street, as you go south, so yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And there is the note on the right-hand side, underneath the third building, that says, you know, utilising topography across the site to provide for direct connections between levels. That can also include using the topography for things like the underground car parking and things like that. So if we actually get that alignment better, we can probably demonstrate that a little bit better through this scenario. So yeah, I'll make a note. Sorry, while I'm driving the plane and doing it at the same time.
I think several places here you have actually the underlying car parking, underground car parking, which is great. And I just think we just keep needing to reinforce it.
I actually used the statement today. I was like, well, you may want to consider underground car parking.
Well,
Council loves it.
I keep saying the building next to us is a 4-storey with a 2-storey underground car park. That's a great example. And it's heritage listed.
Another thing that we kind of talked about at length was questions around the transport impacts, traffic movement, how all of this is, you know, and this is going to be critical moving forward as, you know, beyond the structure plan, during the structure plan. So what the structure plan, how it's responded is clear separation between the movement routes and the main street place functions. To encourage Julian Terrace and Whitelaw as a through route, as an alternative to not all traffic, but some traffic through Murray Street. We're trying to reduce the number of cars, we're not trying to remove them altogether. And our focus is on the targeted intersection upgrades and safety treatments, focusing on improved place outcomes and pedestrian movement. The vehicle movement is secondary, but still absolutely considered. What we will do once we have a preferred streetscape design outcome following this process, next steps will obviously be further concept development, absolutely traffic modelling. We need to understand what that actual implication is, should there be any, further detailed design, budget funding, program for delivery. So we've still got multiple steps to go through this process. This is just testing early concepts to help provide us with direction. We don't want to go and invest, which is why we didn't. We chose not to invest in expensive traffic modelling until we knew what we were actually potentially considering. If we're proposing one large infrastructure project, that is a very different traffic modelling outcome to 10 smaller targeted interventions. So once we have that information, we can go away and do that work. So yeah, I guess the question on this slide is the council comfortable with us consulting on targeted set of projects? We've proposed it in that manner because we believe that they are smaller in scale, easy to deliver, cost-effective, suitable for grant applications, easy to integrate into our LTFP over the long term. So regardless of who's in the role at the time, it's a really easy program of works to be able to continue and run with. And yeah, for all those reasons. So I guess we're just making sure that everyone's comfortable that we consult on it in that manner. And that's why we've not recommended, and we'll touch on that in a second, large change projects such as one-waying of Murray Street for that exact reason, but we'll get to that. So I just want to quickly run through, and I won't go through all of the what this option achieves and the limitations unless people have particular questions, but I wanted to show you or to demonstrate to everyone that we have gone through quite a rigorous process in terms of concept development, concept testing, low, medium, high change scenarios in this instance, a couple of options in others, to really kind of test what those potential outcomes are, we then went away with all the different options, and we did, Michael touched on it, and I won't go into it in too much detail, but the infrastructure prioritisation workshop, where we looked at all the options, including cost, outcomes, benefits, amenity was costed, the impact of trees, all of these things were considered, which gave us a weighting score, which is how we've come to the priority projects that we have, or that we will include within the draft structure plan for formal consultation. I guess I wanted to show you how we came to that through that process. So low change option, our high level preliminary cost estimate would be 1.43 million. Ultimately, we decided to not recommend this option for consultation. We felt that it provided a limited change to the overall streetscape, not comparable to the cost. It didn't really shift how Murray Street operates. It's kind of just improving the side, but not actually improving the function of the street. And we felt that it was less likely to catalyse any type of investment or redevelopment, which is part of the reason why we're doing this as well, to create a safer, more accessible space, but also a place that people want to come and spend money, do business, and develop in suitable locations. So then we had a look at the medium change option, where it's still a cost, so it's $2.81 million. And I will note that I've only shown you one portion of Murray Street. This actual concept expands between Cowton and Lyndock in all of these scenarios, but it's essentially the same replicated further down the street, so there wasn't much point to show you the whole length at this point. There are some changes proposed in this around prioritising pedestrian movement through inclusion of wombat crossings rather than having to wait for traffic lights or doing the run across at the current pedestrian crossings. So that is a traffic calming mechanism that we're choosing to include within this concept. That also allows us to have greater street trees, greening within that space, improvements to the footpath in that material, making it flush, so that way you don't actually have dips in the road but as you're crossing as a pedestrian, which is really good. We've got the accessible car park. So it doesn't fundamentally shift a lot of the traffic, because it still allows for the two-way movement, which is what we are preferring at this stage, but it does remove the right turn movement, so you will reduce some impact into Jacob Lane and allowing that traffic to continue moving forward. So we believe that there is an improvement based on the current situation. The public realm is of a scale that's suitable. We don't want to over-invest in these spaces as well. And peak congestion is noted that it still may remain, but there are other mechanisms also at play outside of this concept to help with that. So part of the overall scope of the entire town centre, which is referred to as Project 9, includes a speed limit reduction to 40 kilometres per hour to coincide with these streetscape changes as well. So it's all about traffic calming, slowing vehicles down. People during peak are doing less than 40 kilometres an hour anyway. In your general day-to-day, you probably won't see much difference unless you're going through after 9 o'clock at night. And then we have the concept for one-way Murray Street. We tested the concept because we got a significant amount of feedback during our early consultation. People wanted one way, they wanted us to bring back the angled parking. So we would be remiss to not test it. But the cost came back at $5.68 million, and the negatives were too much for us to be able to consider. Just from public transport access, emergency vehicle access alone creates huge challenges. The cost of this means that you sacrifice a multitude of other projects across the town centre. You focus all your energy and money into this, knowing all of those negative impacts. Higher delivery risk, cost implementation, and heaps more complexity. The design looks great. If it was two-way and we had a wider road corridor, absolutely. But we do have to make these types of decisions. So you'll see within the low change option, little bit of embellishment, medium change option, you start to see a little bit more, and then we've kind of noted that there may be some opportunity for reinvestment of the surrounding buildings through that promotion. High change option is the one-way design. You've got these really wide footpaths. You'd have to question as well whether or not you actually need that. Wider footpaths and more public realm always appears great until you realise you actually have to go out and activate it as well. So what are you putting in those spaces? You have the risk then of actually creating big wide footpaths that look empty all the time. So there needs to be a balance, and I think medium change is that balance in this scenario. So that's why we're proposing to consult on that one. Won't touch on this one for too long. It was mentioned that we wanted to consider public transport opportunities. We are looking at ways to better include discussion around potential redevelopment of the station precinct around related to Concordia and the future rail extension and other public transport options. I think Concordia will come up again. Yes. So I guess why we're including this, we are mentioning the potential impacts of Concordia, but we're not including a significant amount of information as a result of the town, that will influence the town centre project. We know that there are a number of decisions coming in the future that are outside our current control and that we do not have information on. What we will recommend is that further investigations around Concordia and potential advocacy and things like that be noted as an action item within the development delivery framework, so that way it's still sitting in there, it'll become its own project at a suitable stage. We'll go away and do that work then. At the moment, our focus is on town centre, current challenges, known impacts, and how we can manage that based on the information we have today and what we know reasonably is coming. And that's kind of our focus. So wanting to just make sure we've got the references in there. There's a whole section around the Concordia Code Amendment that's being included in the report, talking about the potential growth and the forthcoming activity centre there and what that might mean for us to be able to consider. In terms of any further large-scale investment in development options, we haven't pursued that at this stage.
So I guess, is there any thought around the impact of, if we have, for example, a better public transport network with more buses, where are the buses and how do they get places and stay because this is what we ran into with the gather round, for example, is the reason that everything stops at Gawler station for the gather round, which is very beneficial to one pub and one cafe, but completely misses our main street precinct, is because that's where you can get buses and that there's space for them and that sort of thing. So I was just wondering if that sort of if we want to activate people at the end of the train line, but it's sort of I don't know, a little squirreled away thing that we can't actually get public transport to.
Yeah, it isn't included in our top investigation areas at the moment. We've considered existing locations and whether or not they can be improved, but we're not focusing on other alternatives to what's currently existing. That's not to say, though, through the GITS, with working with Richard, there's not opportunity to expand that. It's probably a bigger conversation than just town centre. I think it's worthy to put it on the list, but it will probably be considered at a later stage. And it could be integrated if things change and our bus network gets expanded and we're doing these concept designs. This is exactly why the concepts can be changed, because we have the ability to go and then update the concept development to consider anything that is new. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, conscious I don't want to keep everyone too long, I apologise. Had some feedback around potentially not supporting residential within the town centre. We've gone away and had some review around what integrating mixed-use development and residential within town centres can do for activation, supporting day, nighttime activity and viability of projects. We believe that it's still worthy to continue to investigate. Like I said, though, it's good to include for consultation to get that community feedback. If we don't include it, we can't ask the question. I don't think people would offer that freely without being prompted. So it's still recommended that we include it. The locations aren't specific necessarily, and we could consider alternatives to what's currently shown on some of the structure plan options. But the structure plan is quite broad in that it doesn't actually call out specific land use activities. You can kind of tell from the visual look of the design. However, it could potentially be considered in other spots as well.
Personally, I wouldn't use the prospect illustration because that actually goes against your 20% viewing that we talked about earlier.
Because they don't have that,
No,
that
they don't,
requirement
and
there.
it's ugly and people don't like it. So unless you're deliberately putting in there to cause controversy, which might be your plan, but that's really inappropriate. That's not what we see as residential in the main street.
Yeah, and that's probably more so representing having a residential population within proximity to a town centre, not so much the residential design of the building, but absolutely take your point and I'll have that change because I don't want to create unnecessary confusion. So, yep, perfect. And I've just noted that we have 36 residential properties. Whether or not they're all currently being used for residential, I suspect not, but that's our current count, which is probably why it's quite
So is this including for the town centre, are we talking about the high street and all of that as well? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and that would be the majority of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought,
There's not much else. Was there another question?
Well, I think I was going to ask pretty much the same question, but I imagine it varies across High Street, Murray Street, because High Street you could have really nice terrace structure up there, which is not that monstrosity.
Yeah.
But yeah, you couldn't have that in the main street.
No, and we're not proposing to do that at all. It does conflict with the built form parameters that we're recommending. I'll try and find an example that has an alternative. That was just an option, an example of having integrated medium-scale residential as part of a mixed-use outcome, how that supported their town centre.
So would you do it without mixed use on the eastern side of High Street?
Potentially, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, because from that I just got there was probably standalone was out of the question, but
Not necessarily. The context of the site will be the key determining factor about what's suitable for the area.
all right, thanks.
Yeah.
Look, I think you've captured the theme. I mean, my personal opinion is yes, absolutely, we need to be looking at those mixed-use outcomes more broadly, and it's not reinventing the wheel either. A lot of the old heritage buildings actually had the upper stories so that the families that ran the businesses could live above where they worked. I think we've come away from that history a little bit more broadly because the other opportunities that come online. But I think it would be remiss not to look at these opportunities to provide housing opportunities that are central to your CBD, to activate that foot traffic again and have those resident opportunities for the apartment style market that potentially we don't have at this point in time. Not potentially, we don't have at this point in time. And I think there is a compliancy thing around activation of second stories more broadly around a heritage building that make it too hard, but make it seem too hard, I should say. That said, I think if we are having these conversations more broadly and we do make sure that we remind that it's not a new thing, and if done properly, it actually can activate upper levels to a level that they might otherwise not be, and promote that foot traffic that we want in our businesses and opportunities that could create. I think it would be amiss if we only focused on short-term accommodation and not have long-term accommodation opportunities and residents as well in the mainstream. So in answer to your question, the balance between living, working and trading appropriate for future growth, I think the balance is appropriate. But we need to keep on testing it.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned last time that we are in the process of developing a couple of case studies which will outline what some of those kind of typically building code issues are, which prevents people from converting top shop places into residential apartments. City of Adelaide's doing some awesome work through their ARCI program around identifying, providing information to landowners around how they can actually do that and what their the considerations need to be. We want to do that contextually for a couple of sites around Gawler, just as a demonstration of here's the things that you need to consider, and these are the questions you should be asking. But no, some places will be easier than others, particularly when you're talking residential and fire safety and things like that. But yeah, we're developing that for to coincide with this. Yeah. All right. Encouraging investment in heritage places. So yeah, the question was asked, and it was asked again tonight, about how will we encourage investment in these places, noting that, you know, whether or not it's reality, it often appears to be way more complex and way more costly. It's always determined on what you're proposing, of course. The structure plan will respond with having adaptive reuse embedded into the opportunities. The design guidelines will be critical about how new development can sit behind and above heritage using those built form parameters. We're about to provide some feedback early next week around updated design guidelines, and we're just about to get that to review. But this team did work on that ARCI program with City of Adelaide, so we've got the right consultants on board to help us with that messaging and how that would work. And what we've also done, and I think we mentioned it last time, but some of the streetscape improvement options that we are including for consultation, we would not recommend council invest money into doing these projects unless they coincided with private investment on the adjoining building. Some of them don't make sense as a standalone project, given the cost and scale of what's required. But by having them on the books, having them costed, having them ready to go potentially, that potentially could be one lever that council could pull in order to encourage development outcomes and the right development outcomes in sites that we would prefer to see developed. And that would be our contribution into encouraging them to come to Gawler. That's obviously a different conversation as well, which we will, touch on if those streetscape options are endorsed through this process. But through the forthcoming economic development framework and the larger strategy later on, a question that I've asked and we will continue to consider, and with this group and others, is why Gawler? Why would someone come here, invest their money? What does council do? What does the industry do? How are they supported? And these are all these questions that we'll start to answer through partially this project, partially the actions that follow, partially the economic development framework. But there's a whole piece of work around answering that question, and some of that will help us encourage investment in heritage and non-heritage places as well. Protecting key vistas and streetscapes. So I wanted to demonstrate, don't really need to touch on this too much. There is a whole page dedicated through our spatial analysis section of our previous background information that will be appendixed to the structure plan that highlights the key vistas and view lines that we are looking to protect as part of this project. And that considers the escarpment, view lines coming into the town of Gawler, and different kind of visual areas, but making sure that those landmarks are protected as well. So it is covered within the background analysis. It does form part of the built form parameters and why they've been structured in the way that they have, but just wanted to flag that there is more information within the document itself. Probably doesn't need to have much more said than that. The one thing I will flag, because it came up as a point of feedback, and I just wanted to flag it quickly, that there was a brief comment made that said that there's a view line between down Cowan Street into the State Heritage precinct that would need to be protected as part of consideration of height and built form and things like that. This is the only time I've ever seen it, which is why I think it's so interesting, is that the heritage consultant's current recommendation, and always subject to reconsideration, is that the Albion Mill was formerly on the corner of Cowan and Main North Road in that location, and you can see an image of it. It's approximately 4 stories within that image, give or take. Because that existed on that site historically, the heritage consultant's recommendation is if we're considering height in a particular location, then that actually may be one that is suitable for height to bring the height back to the original state of how it was originally presented historically, if that makes sense. It became a key entry statement into the town of Gawler, and so should there be an opportunity to integrate some design and height requirements within that site, then they've actually said this might be one location where it actually could be suitable and aligned with the heritage background of the site, which is wild. I've never seen anything like that before, so I thought I'd just flag.
I don't necessarily disagree, but I wouldn't push that too hard
Yeah.
because it'll fall in a heap.
I will say that there's also a special interface type. There is a special interface type that talks specifically to development adjoining the State Heritage Precinct, and there is separate setting back parameters that are different to this and are considered. So that's one side of the development site. The setback considerations and interface is a different side. So,
Well,
yeah.
You know, just be careful because I could spend a few hours disputing
Yeah,
some of that.
yeah.
And seeing you have highlighted that, we just skip forward to 2 more slides where you've put a scenario of the Gawler Station car park in. Again, highly inflammatory.
Oh, yeah, and
highly inflammatory diagram.
we purposefully are, these are similar to kind of the maximum development envelopes, and it's a computer program that they use to test floor plates and size to see how it would work. It's absolutely not a design proposed. I just wanted to show you that work had been done to consider options. We're not saying that either of those are a preferred outcome, but it was just a way to kind of demonstrate that other sites had been done in a similar manner to test different types of land use activities and how car parking, what number of car parks would need to be required and things like that.
As an elected member, I would fight for either of those options to not even be considered. So.
Yeah, and it is flagged through the documentation that the height and scale would need to consider the adjoining residential development as well. So this is to test an outcome, then the built form parameters come in, which would reduce the scale overall anyway, which is why we're not showing that information as part of the consultation package, because that was really early testing before they did any of the zone work. So yeah. So don't be concerned with that. It's also not our site, it's a DIT site. It's probably unlikely in the long term. So
given the fuss that was made about the bridge going and for the electric train, that was fractional to what that will cause. So.
I think we've kind of covered on the Concordia stuff. I did have it in a further slide, so I don't think we actually need to touch on that unless anyone has a question. Yes, Mayor.
The only point about Concordia, which I know that we were talking about trying to preempt outcomes and it all comes into context, and we are thinking in such a way that we can adapt should these things come online. But I guess I keep on harping on about it, but the link road, for example, like a link road from Lyndoch out to Sturt Highway, what opportunities that would open up for the Lyndoch Road intersection, or what it's closed for at the moment because we've got too many trucks, but then should that happen, what we can potentially look at, and then also public transport. Now I know we're touching on it slightly, but a little bit more onus on the contextual. I don't know how to do it. This is merely just me spitballing with you here, because I think that we need to identify that Concordia is going to have an effect, and I think we need to identify we have those opportunities in the back of our mind, but we acknowledge we can't react to them until they come online. But here is an example of how we could positively, because we're already thinking about it. Not that it's too hard to do at this point in time.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean that that's what you're doing. I'm just trying to figure out a way, how do we communicate and acknowledge that there is a population growth that's going to mimic our current population here right now up the hill? How do we turn that into opportunities or advocate for key infrastructure deliveries because it links to our desirables if they happen?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And when developing, so on a previous workshop, we included a table that looked at what will be our built form and activity needs to service the growing population, which included, 1 to 2 healthcare centres, commercial, 16,000 square metres of retail, extra community spaces, community attractors and the like. That table, which has informed us exploring strategic sites and things like that for future options, includes those growing populations. So it is considered within that context, and the streetscape options are considered to an extent that we know it's coming, and so a small-scale recommendation included within the Movement in Place report is to provide some options for discussion with DIT later on around the Lindock intersection specifically, around different scale sequencing of lights, reconfiguration of the intersection, but that would require consultation with DIT. And the reason why we've not specifically included discussion around things like the Key Connect, the Link Road and things like that, is that by the time that's actually brought online, we'll almost be at the end of our action plan for the town centre because it's so far away. So whilst we are considering it in a council lens, because there's other projects also occurring at the same time, the approach has been town centre first with those considerations, but not necessarily accounting for large-scale traffic reconfigurations to accommodate the 1 to 2,000 homes coming in at Concordia. So, so there are things working with Richard in the traffic team around broader management of traffic across the whole town of Gawler. It probably doesn't need to necessarily be picked up through this.
Oh, and to be completely transparent, I am purely selfishly trying to say, how does your document help us advocate for early delivery infrastructure because of the outcomes that we can pursue sooner? Because if the Link Road came in next year, what does that open us up to opportunity-wise? And would we invest the same $2.8 million now, or would we change it up slightly and focus differently? Question mark. You know what I mean? So those sorts of conversations or documents that we have, which absolutely I completely acknowledge, the Concordia and population growth opens up all these opportunities. We wouldn't be looking at some of the opportunities we are if we didn't have the population growth in the region. But yeah, how that then relates into those key deliverables like that Link Road. Because if we're saying, look, that's not going to be here in 10 years, we don't worry about it now, but then it's here in 3, what does that do? And again, pie in the sky thinking, like, yeah, I acknowledge that at this point in time, they're talking about 3,000 allotments coming on before any key deliverables of that scale. Personally, I think that's wrong, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, and if something was to dramatically change in the short term, the good thing about this project is that we're not proposing to do all these projects in year 1. So maybe when we're prioritising which projects go first, maybe the ones that affect Lindock intersection and things like that, for example, maybe we push them down to a future year, knowing that we'll have more information about what Concordia is doing and what those kind of impacts might be. Regarding, do we postpone investment into streetscape upgrades until we know more about what's happening with Concordia? I would still say no, because what we're trying to do at the same time is establish behaviour with new residents, and we want those people to come into the town of Gawler for their services, their shopping, their boutique retail, let other out-of-town centres do the everyday needs. That's fine. We'll still get a good slice of that based on the research that we've done. But for those things that those out-of-centre towns won't be able to offer, we want to make sure that when they do come here, they have a nice experience and stay for that little bit longer and spend a little bit more money and go into somewhere that they didn't necessarily expect to when they got here. So that's kind of the thought process around that as well.
Absolutely, and I think it is paramount that we are clear on that, because if we don't do anything, then yes, we will be ring-rooted around and a better opportunity will come on. So absolutely, I completely agree that Concordia can't be the reason we don't do anything. Yeah.
Two things. I'm conscious of time.
Yes, sorry.
And I guess the second thing I was just going to say is that, and I guess I'm reflecting back to last night again, back to the committee, but the comments they had, which was about brand and about the relevance of the town centre, I think is pretty important to this. You probably have a window of 5 to maybe 10 years, but probably closer to 5, where I think if you're going to win the hearts and minds of people in Concordia and Roseworthy and other places, it's the relevance ongoing of the main street. I think we need to be putting that effort in sooner rather than later. And I think if you don't do that, you're going to get to a situation where there'll be so much competition at Roseworthy to the north, plus also the intended self-containment, if you like, at Concordia, that it'll get, in a retail sense, tougher rather than easier. And therefore our focus on our strengths, which is the main street, the heritage, the place, they're the things that the big box centres won't be able to achieve. So the more we can make that work properly, the better off we're getting on with that.
I only have a couple of slides left. What I'll do, members were interested in understanding a little bit more around the thought process around the communication strategy for consultation. What I might actually do is extract these slides out. Oh, you've got the slides already in the hub. I won't go into the detail. Happy for you to go have a look, and if you do have any questions, follow up. I will just flag though that the current intention, and this is subject to change, is developing upwards of 6 fact sheets focusing on Murray Street, what could change, traffic access and movement, highlighting this targeted approach and why building height, street walls and scale, really getting into those diagrams and improved communication about what that actually means. The greener Gawler, introducing the 30% canopy target concept, heritage and investment around how the design guidelines can help with heritage outcomes and infill, and then parking, what's changing and what isn't, because parking is always the number one feedback option that we get, whether we need it or whether it's required or not. And so it would be silly to not include some information about what's happening in that space. So that's the current thought, and absolutely open to feedback if there's something missing. And I'll prepare drafts. We'll distribute that well before consultation, get internal feedback from everyone before we go out to consultation as well. As well with a full engagement plan. This is not the only bits of information that will be created. In terms of next steps, we have a BCRG, Business Community Reference Group meeting tomorrow evening. Members are obviously welcome to come and observe. Following that, updating the draft structural plan. We'll put it up at the May ordinary meeting for hopefully endorsement to commence community consultation. We'll be preparing all of that information coincide. June, we're proposing to go out to consultation for a period of 4 weeks. We'll come back to council to present preliminary findings from that engagement outcomes whilst we prepare the final report. And then the current timeline anticipates coming back to council in August for endorsement of the structure plan and development delivery frameworks. And then during all of that time, there will be other workshops and information briefings around those various topics: engagement, the development delivery framework inclusions, action plan, changes to the report as a result of feedback, etc. So you'll all have that at different points.
Fabulous.
And that's it. Thank you so much.
Stacey, just one extra thing.
No,
just in
please.
case for a moment
Sure.
you think that we actually can find things in the hub, a directional email is always with a link is much more helpful.
Sure.
Nearly 4 years, and I can never, unless I go back and find a link, cannot find things in the hub. So just putting it there.
No, not a problem. I don't
It's
even know
like
where the hub
hiding it
is,
in the
so
bottom of the
I will
form.
make sure that is done.
It's just ridiculous.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sticking with us this evening.